In a forgotten desert town, where every door locked before sunset, one man ruled. Through fear, then a stranger arrived. And for the first time, nobody understood why he wasn't afraid. The town of Red Hollow sat alone between endless stretches of dust and stone. From a distance, it looked like any other frontier settlement wooden storefronts. Tired horses tied to rails and wind carrying sand through the narrow street, but anyone who stayed long enough felt it. Fear lived there, not the loud kind that came with gunfights or drunken saloon brawls. This fear was quieter, heavier. It lingered in the way shopkeepers avoided eye contact, in how conversations stopped whenever certain footsteps echoed across the boards of the main street. The entire town belonged to one man. His name was Caleb Rourke. No sheriff challenged him. No rancher argued with him. No traveler stayed long enough to ask questions, because everyone knew what happened to people who did. Caleb rarely needed to draw his gun anymore. His reputation worked faster than bullets. Ranchers paid him a protection fee. The saloon owner kept a bottle waiting for him every evening. The banker approved whatever loans Rourke demanded. And if someone refused, by morning, their property would be burned, their livestock gone. Or their body found somewhere outside town where the desert kept its secrets. Over the years, Red Hollow stopped resisting. People lowered their heads and survived. Children grew up, learning one rule above all others: do not cross Caleb Rourke. The strange thing was, no one remembered when it had truly begun. It felt as if the outlaw had always been there, like the mountains surrounding the town. Mova. Until the afternoon, the stranger arrived. A single rider appeared from the southern road, moving slowly through the shimmering heat of the desert. His horse walked instead of trotted, as though the journey had been long. Dust covered his coat. His hat was pulled low. When he reached the town entrance, he paused for a moment, studying the quiet street ahead. People noticed him immediately. Travelers rarely came to Red Hollow anymore. The stranger guided his horse forward, boots brushing the dusty ground as he dismounted. Near the saloon, no one spoke to him. No one welcomed him, because the same thought crossed every mind in town at the same time. He didn't know whose town this was, but the stranger didn't ask questions. He simply stepped onto the wooden walkway, pushed open the saloon doors, and walked inside like a man who had nothing to fear. Long before Red Hollow became a town of whispers and locked doors, it had been a place of opportunity. 20 years earlier, the settlement was nothing more than a cluster of hopeful ranchers, miners, and traders who believed the harsh desert could still offer them a future. Wagons rolled in from distant territories, bringing families, tools, and dreams of land that belonged to no one. In those early days, Red Hollow had a sheriff. It had town meetings. Disputes were settled with words more often than guns. But the desert changes men, and some men arrive already changed. Caleb Rourke first appeared during a brutal winter that nearly destroyed the settlement. Supplies were scarce. Ranchers were losing cattle to disease and cold winds sweeping down from the mountains. Rourke arrived with a small group of riders and wagons full of supplies. At first, the town welcomed him. He was quiet, but confident. A man who seemed comfortable in violence without ever showing it openly. When a group of bandits attempted to rob the supply wagons outside town, Rourke and his men handled them quickly. Too quickly. 3 bandits were found dead by the roadside the next morning. After that, people began respecting him, then depending on him. Within months, Rourke had positioned himself as the town's unofficial protector. Ranchers paid him small fees in exchange for security. Travelers were warned that Red Hollow was under his protection at first. The arrangement seemed reasonable. The sheriff even supported it, until the sheriff disappeared. No one ever found his body. The official explanation was that he had left town during the night after an argument with several ranchers. But most people knew better. The sheriff had been the last man who openly questioned Rourke's growing influence. After that, things changed quickly. Rourke's small group of riders became a permanent presence. They occupied buildings around town, watching the streets, listening to conversations. Ranchers who refused to pay protection suddenly faced mysterious problems: barn fires, missing horses, water wells sabotaged in the middle of summer, and every time trouble happened, Rourke appeared afterward, offering help. For a price, fear slowly replaced trust. Within 5 years, Red Hollow no longer belonged to its people. It belonged to Caleb Rourke. Some tried to fight back. A rancher named Thomas Grady once gathered 6 men and rode to confront Rourke outside the saloon. Witnesses later said, the conversation lasted less than a minute before gunfire erupted. Only Rourke walked away. After that day, resistance ended. People adapted. The banker approved whatever Rourke requested. The saloon owner kept quiet about meetings held behind closed doors. Even the preacher stopped speaking about justice during Sunday sermons. Children were warned not to stare at Rourke when he passed through town. Men avoided walking alone at night. Women locked their doors before sunset. Years passed, and eventually, the people of Red Hollow stopped, hoping someone might challenge him. Because everyone who tried ended the same. Dead or gone. Which was why the stranger who arrived that dusty afternoon confused the town so deeply. He walked through Red Hollow like a man who had never heard the name Caleb Rourke. And when someone finally whispered a warning to him inside the saloon, the stranger simply nodded once, then calmly asked where he could find the man. Who owned the town? The saloon grew quiet the moment the stranger asked the question. Where can I find the man who owns this town? The bartender froze with a glass halfway through polishing. A few men sitting near the card tables slowly looked up, their expressions shifting from curiosity to something closer to alarm. One older rancher leaned forward and spoke in a low voice. You don't look like you're from around here. The stranger didn't answer right away. He removed his hat, brushing dust from the brim, and placed it calmly on the counter. No, he said. Just passing through. The rancher glanced toward the saloon windows, as if expecting someone to be standing outside. You shouldn't be asking questions like that, he muttered. The stranger finally looked at him. I'm looking for Caleb Rourke. The name seemed to pull the air out of the room. Chairs creaked softly as a few men shifted in their seats. Someone near the back quietly stood up and left through the rear door without saying a word. The bartender leaned closer. The stranger, his voice barely louder than a whisper. Listen carefully, he said. You finish your drink, you get back on your horse, and you ride out the same road you came in on. The stranger studied him with calm eyes. That bad? The bartender didn't smile. You have no idea. Before the stranger could respond, the saloon doors swung open. 3 men stepped inside. Their coats were dark with dust from the road, revolvers hanging low at their hips. They didn't need badges or introductions. Everyone in Red Hollow recognized them immediately. Rourke's riders. The room went silent. One of the men, tall and narrow-faced, slowly scanned the saloon before his eyes landed on the stranger sitting at the bar. New face? He said. No one answered. The rider walked closer, boots thudding against the wooden floor. His hand rested casually near his revolver. You just ride in today? He asked. The stranger nodded. That's right. The rider leaned against the bar beside him. Funny thing about this town, he continued. Visitors usually introduce themselves. First, the stranger took a slow sip of his drink. Name's not important. That answer didn't sit well. The rider's eyes narrowed. What is important then? The stranger set the glass down gently. I'm looking for Caleb Rourke. Several men in the saloon quietly looked away. The rider stared at him for a long moment before letting out a short laugh. Well, he said, glancing toward his partners, that makes you either brave or very stupid. The stranger didn't react. Where can I find him? He repeated. The rider studied him carefully now, as if trying to understand something that didn't make sense. Most people who came to Red Hollow eventually learned the rules. This man hadn't, or maybe he simply didn't care. Finally, the rider pushed himself away from the bar. You won't have to look far, he said. Rourke usually rides through town before sundown. He paused at the door before adding one last sentence, and when he does, you might wish you'd never asked. The riders stepped back outside. Inside the saloon, the silence returned, but it felt heavier now. The bartender leaned closer to the stranger again. You should leave, he said quietly, but the stranger only reached for his hat. Outside, the sun had begun sinking toward the horizon, and somewhere beyond the edge of town, Caleb Rourke was already riding back. The sun was touching the horizon when the sound of hooves finally echoed through Red Hollow. People heard it before they saw him. Shopkeepers quietly stepped away from their doors. A woman pulling water from the well stopped and hurried inside her house. Even the stray dogs seemed to disappear from the street. Caleb Rourke had returned. He rode slowly through town, like a man who knew every building, every shadow, and every frightened face, watching from behind closed windows. Dust followed his horse. As it moved down the main road, two of his riders trailed several yards behind him. When he reached the saloon, Rourke stopped. The doors were still swinging slightly from the wind. Inside, the stranger sat alone at a corner table now, hat back on, his hands resting calmly on the table in front of him. Rourke stepped inside. The temperature in the room seemed to drop. He was taller than most men, broad-shouldered, with the kind of presence that filled a room without effort. His revolver hung low on his hip, worn from years of use. The stranger didn't move. For several seconds, neither man spoke. Then Rourke walked closer. I hear you've been asking about me, he said. The stranger looked up slowly. I have, Rourke studied him carefully. There was no nervousness in the stranger's face, no hesitation, just a calm that didn't belong in a town like Red Hollow. That's unusual, Rourke said. Most men avoid my name. The stranger leaned back slightly in his chair. I've been looking for you a long time. A few men near the walls quietly held their breath. Rourke's eyes narrowed. Have you now? The stranger nodded once. Then he said something no one in Red Hollow had ever dared to say, you don't own this town anymore. The words hung in the air like the moment before thunder. For the first time in years, Caleb Rourke stopped smiling. The words settled over the saloon like a slow-moving storm. You don't own this town anymore. For a moment, no one moved. Caleb Rourke stared at the stranger, searching his face for the usual signs fear. Rourke, the sudden realization that a man had just made the worst mistake of his life. But the stranger simply sat there, calm, unshaken, around the room. Men who had lived under Rourke's shadow for years avoided looking directly at either of them. They had seen this kind of confrontation before. It never ended well. Rourke finally let out a quiet chuckle. You must be new to Red Hollow, he said. The stranger didn't answer. Rourke slowly removed his gloves and placed them on the table. Beside him, Men have come through this town before, thinking they could change things, he continued. They all believed they were different. His voice remained relaxed, but the room felt tighter with every word. They weren't. One of Rourke's riders stepped forward slightly, his hand hovering near his revolver. But Rourke lifted a hand without looking back. The rider stopped. Rourke's attention never left the stranger. "So, tell me something," he said quietly. "What makes you think you're the man who finally changes Red Hollow?" The stranger leaned forward now, resting his arms on the table. "I didn't come here to change the town." That answer seemed to surprise Rourke. The stranger continued, "I came here for you." Outside, the last light of day slipped behind the desert hills, inside the saloon. Shadows stretched across the wooden floor. Rourke studied the man more carefully now. "You ride a long way just to find me?" he asked. "Yes." "And you expect to walk out of here afterward?" The stranger paused for a moment before answering. "I didn't come here expecting to walk away." That honesty created a ripple through the room. This wasn't a drifter looking for trouble. This was a man who had already accepted what might happen. Rourke slowly nodded. "Well," he said, "that makes things simpler." He stepped back slightly, clearing space between them. For years, the people of Red Hollow had watched men die in the street outside. But tonight felt different, because the stranger still didn't look afraid. And that uncertainty more than any threat began to unsettle Caleb Rourke himself. "Sun's almost gone," Rourke said. He gestured toward the door. "Let's finish this outside." The stranger stood. His chair scraped softly against the wooden floor as every person in the saloon quietly moved out of the way. The two men walked toward the doors. For the first time in years, the entire town of Red Hollow was about to witness something no one believed possible. Someone had finally come to face the man they all feared. Night was settling over Red Hollow when the two men stepped into the street. The sky burned deep orange along the horizon, fading slowly into dark blue above the desert mountains. A dry wind moved through the town, carrying dust across the empty road. Doors creaked open along the buildings. People watched from shadows and windows, careful to stay out of sight. No one wanted to stand too close when guns were about to be drawn. Caleb Rourke walked several steps into the center of the street before stopping. The stranger followed, calm and steady. For years, this same dusty road had belonged to Rourke. Every gunfight in Red Hollow had ended the same way, with him still standing. Tonight was supposed to be no different. Rourke turned to face the stranger. "You still haven't told me your name," he said. The stranger adjusted his hat slightly. "My name wouldn't mean much to you," Rourke smirked. "That's probably true." The wind pushed sand across the ground between them. For a long moment, neither man moved. Then the stranger spoke again. "But you knew my brother." The words caught Rourke's attention. His expression changed slightly. "Did I?" "Yes." The stranger's voice stayed even. "Thomas Grady." The name drifted through the quiet street. Some of the townspeople listening from the shadows recognized it immediately. Years ago, Thomas Grady had been the rancher who tried to challenge Rourke, the man who rode to the saloon with 6 others and never rode home. Rourke studied the stranger again, this time more carefully. "You're telling me you're his brother?" The stranger nodded once. "You killed him outside this town?" Rourke let out a slow breath. "Your brother made a bad decision. He made the right one." The stranger's hand rested loosely near his revolver now. He just stood alone. Silence returned, but something had shifted. This fight was no longer about the town. It was about unfinished history. Rourke's eyes hardened. "You rode all this way for revenge?" "No," the stranger said quietly. I rode here to finish what he started. For the first time in many years, Caleb Rourke felt something unfamiliar pressing into the back of his mind. Doubt the stranger didn't carry the anger most revenge-seekers did. There was no shaking hand, no desperation, just quiet certainty. The wind stopped. The street became perfectly still. Two men stood, 20 feet apart beneath the fading light. Hands hovered near worn revolvers. Every person watching knew what came next. Gunfighters in the West didn't need signals. They understood the moment when talking ended. The stranger's coat shifted slightly as he moved his hand. Rourke reacted instantly. 2 revolvers cleared leather at the same time. Gunfire shattered. To silence. The sound echoed against the buildings and rolled out into the empty desert beyond the town. For a split second, no one moved. Dust drifted slowly through the air. Then one man staggered. Caleb. Rourke looked down at the dark stain spreading across his chest. His revolver slipped from his hand and struck the ground. The outlaw who had ruled Red Hollow for nearly 20 years elapsed into the dust of the same street he once controlled. Across from him, the stranger remained standing, breathing slowly, gun still lowered at his side. And for the first time in 2 decades, Red Hollow belonged to no one. Asterisk for several seconds after the gunshot. Red Hollow remained silent. No one stepped into the street, no one spoke. The people watching from doorways and windows seemed frozen in place, as if the town itself didn't know how to react to what had just happened. For 20 years, Caleb Rourke had been the one. Constant in their lives, the man no one could defeat, and now he lay motionless in the dust. The stranger slowly lowered his revolver and slid it back into the worn leather holster. His face showed no victory, no satisfaction, only the quiet weight of something that had finally ended. A few townspeople cautiously stepped outside. An older rancher approached first, the same man who had warned the stranger earlier in the saloon. His eyes moved from Rourke's body to the man standing across the street. "It's over," he asked quietly. The stranger nodded once. "That depends on the town," the rancher frowned. "What do you mean?" The stranger looked around at the buildings, the people slowly gathering. The long street that had been ruled by fear for so many years. One man controlled this place, he said, but fear kept him in power. No one argued, because they all knew it was true. The stranger walked toward his horse, which had been tied near the saloon since the afternoon. The animal shifted slightly as he untied the reins. A woman finally asked the question everyone was thinking. "Are you staying?" The stranger paused, resting one hand on the saddle. "No," he said. The town watched as he mounted the horse. "You're free now," he added calmly. "What'd you do with that? Is your choice?" With that, he turned the horse toward the same road he had arrived from earlier that day. And without another word, the man who ended Caleb Rourke's rule rode out of Red Hollow and disappeared into the dark desert. Sometimes power survives, not because it is strong, but because people are too afraid to challenge it. And sometimes it only takes one person to remind everyone else that fear isn't permanent. If you enjoy dark Wild West stories like this, subscribe to Whispers of the West for more untold legends, silent gunslingers, and forgotten frontier tales.